just want to get something off my mind, and something that frankly really needs to be said, and there's very few Marxists who are willing to step up and say something. This anti-white politics is bullshit.
Because it's wrong.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted her for standing out.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted him for standing out. The only change that ever happens is when people stand out, and I have sat back down.
Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Are you in any physical danger here? Are you in any physical danger here? Is that girl in any physical danger here? Emmett Till was hanged by his neck after he was beaten almost to death, simply because he made a statement to a white woman. Does he have a reason to be angry? Every time I do the exercise, there is a point at which I know I have made the point. And we could stop there, but you have to nail it down. And so it goes on longer than some people think it should, but you have to nail it down.
Race and leftism.
Jason Unruhe put out a video about anti-whiteness. That's literally the next video coming out, because, oh boy, I have to address that.
Yeah. Hold on. I've been getting money, where the fuck you been?
I've been busy, I've been working, I've been doing art, but I'm here now. So let's address the big white elephant in the room that's taking up more space than it should. Whiteness. And why you, if you identify as white, need to fucking stop.
White people, yay!
White people having fun. Global domination over everyone. White people smile so bright. Genocide for anyone who isn't white.
Before I go any further, I would like to make this very clear. I do not think Jason is an evil person. I believe that he is, above everything else, human. He is prone to flaw, just like all the rest of us. And that this video is not to say that Jason is bad and that you should cancel Jason. It's more that he has his limitations. We're about to examine those limitations in order to get a better understanding of how, if you happen to fall into this category, you can unlearn this behavior now, and also to reaffirm pretty much every person of color who has not been able to articulate this very particular talking point in regards to white persons. So, let's get to that.
Let's get it on. And yes, I realize the response will be given to this video is, you're white, you're triggered, etc. As if somehow that's supposed to be an argument for something.
The problem that many white leftists face in regard to identity politics comes down to their fundamental relationship with whiteness, an identity that we must remember was constructed to amplify and justify class hierarchy. Whiteness does not exist in a vacuum. It has been constructed over hundreds of years, and especially in the US empire, has been a literal status which has been codified into law. So when we speak of identity politics, and specifically white leftists who are very against identity politics, it's not that they are really against any real issue of one's politics around identity. It speaks more to their inability to speak to their own identity within these spaces, specifically whiteness. So in short, white leftists struggle the most with facing their own white identity and an inability to actually challenge said white identity in a white supremacist system.
Do it, man, will you? I know what I'm doing.
Again, you do.
I know a lot of people will instantly scream class reductionism, as if Marx didn't write a theory about class and class struggle. Now, the history of why you have to work with class to eliminate other forms of oppression are already known. It's already there in Marx's writings, so I don't have to rehash it here. The problem is that everybody's just sort of pretending that it doesn't exist or not following it.
as long as fair-skinned people will choose a white identity in a world in which racial hierarchy literally does affect people's lives, there will always be a giant schism between workers. This is not an issue that is going to resolve itself post-revolution. This is a thing that must be solved now in order to unite workers, which does mean, and this is the part that is going to get me in trouble on this website, being anti-white is radical, is revolutionary, and is fundamentally necessary in order to unite workers. Because there are no white people, there are only people. And as long as white persons, fair-skinned people who want to believe that they are white, there will always be a schism between people in the same economic status when a certain group of people believes themselves fundamentally entitled to the riches of capitalism. Because what is whiteness?
Mommy, why are all the colored people eating way over there?
Well, Marty, that's segregation. And segregation works because it has to. You see, Marty, segregation is nature. It's natural for things to stay with their own kind.
Really?
Sure. Why, you've never seen an earthworm sit down to eat dinner with a grizzly bear.
I say, old chum, this meal is most sumptuous. The truffle oil in this blanched vegetable medley is exquisitely prepared.
And my plate of donkey bones is dang-dong good.
Here, here.
We ought to eat together more often. It's dang-dong absurd that we don't.
Oh, 'tis indeed. 'Tis as absurd as a banana eating a melon.
Now do you understand?
No, it still seems unfair and cruel.
Well, that's fine, Marty, but you're going to have to bottle those feelings.
Bottle? Feelings?
That's right. You can bottle anything in Cocor's new bottles.
You've got my attention. Now just tell me more.
Cocor's new bottles hold thrice the marmalade as an old bottle. These are not your grandfather's bottles.
Now, it's one thing to acknowledge that there is a racial struggle in the United States, which is obviously very true, as well as many other countries as well. But there's a difference between just abandoning Marxism and claiming you're doing it, when really you're just doing ID poll.
Jason claims that ID poll just doesn't work.
Whereas ID poll people have succeeded at, frankly, nothing.
Despite the fact that in his very specific case, white leftists dominate online when it comes to representing the image of communism and anarchism. Both two ideologies that are full of people of color who just apparently don't have platforms online the way white do. So, in an ironic twist of events, Jason is a prime example of how idpoll actually does work.
Now, it's very obvious that I'm anti-ID poll, you know, like Lenin, Marx, and Che, and, well, every other, all the successful communist leaders were also a part of.
A few moments later.
Okay. My point is here, going on about this, haha, white people, haha, spicy food, exactly how is that supposed to bring about revolution? How is deliberately insulting 60% of the population supposed to do that? Why would you just simply insult the majority of the population? I mean, this is not a revolutionary tactic. Do you really think that you're going to reach the average white person who's racist by going, haha, spicy food, you can't handle this? Do you really think that's gonna happen? Like, do you think that's gonna reach them? But simply insulting white people isn't going to do anything. Well, why are they going to come over to your side and build communist revolution in America if you're deliberately pushing an ideology that excludes them?
Even a minimal amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves, including the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. These behaviors wind up preserving the status quo, protecting white comfort, and therefore reinstating white dominance.
When I speak of anti-whiteness, the irrational version of anti-whiteness is the assumption that the hatred and violence and bigotry of white persons, historically to maintain their white status against non-white actors, black and brown folk, is what anti-whiteness is. The same violence, the same hatred, and the same bigotry, except from black and brown folk against specifically white persons. Such a irrational phobia is incredibly revealing of this white anxiety and paranoia. For in reality, anti-whiteness is a deconstruction of racial mythology around whiteness. The assumption that all science and knowledge was created by white persons, and that science is not some powerful tool that all humans, regardless of their skin tone, use in order to understand the world in which we live. It is the demarcation of legitimacy through skin tone. The issue here is that white identity is the basis of supremacy in race and racial discourse. It does not matter if we're talking about exclusively European context, or America, or Canada, or other regions of the world. The issue here is that dichotomy between white and black, an issue that is quite literally white and black.
Yes, racism exists. I don't say it doesn't. I have never said that. I have always supported the struggle to end racism.
I wonder if he know that I know he's lying right now.
If you push this anti-white view rather than an anti-racist view, then, well, you're not going to accomplish anything. Promoting equality is going to work. Pointing out injustice is going to work.
While liberals may use terminology such as anti-racism, we as Marxists, who have a proud tradition of dialectical materialism, must not be vague about the realities of race. White supremacy is the reality of race, as it affects people in their day-to-day lives. While it is true that racial categories have been created for the various different forms of people, the truth of the matter is the dominant hierarch in this system of racial oppression is whiteness and white people. So no, being anti-racist does not go far enough, nor get to the root of race as it exists. That if we are to actually do away with race as a mythological boogeyman to divide the working class,
I use Caucasian.
it is up to us to affirm a stance against white supremacy and white identity, which means being anti-white, not anti-racist.
It's this kind of insanity for ID poll, which is largely is a tremendous problem in the first world because of the lack of general revolutionary potential. People don't actually want to do revolution, and then when you have that kind of a situation, you have all these other, like, frankly, idiotic ideas that are coming up in place of that, like ID poll, etc.
Jason, who once identified as a Maoist, clings very strongly to the Mao Zedong quote in which Mao regarded the First World as having no revolutionary potential. But upon further analysis, such a quote, in its true context, is more a condemnation of the relationship the First World has to the Second and Third World. That the reality is, places like the US, Canada, where Jason lives, and other First World nations, is the reality that these places are giant extractors of wealth, capital, and resources from the Second and Third World. So revolution, unlike in Russia's case, with the ending of the Tsarist system and the establishment of the Soviet Union, is not about overthrowing the status quo and building up a new one. It's about overthrowing these institutions as they exist. That in the case of a place like America, there is no communist America. There is a communist future beyond the U.S. empire. That the goal is not to make America great. It's to do away with America as a fundamental basis of a state that is about capital extraction. So the revolutionary potential in the First World is not non-existent. It's that it has a completely different basis. That our job is to deconstruct the First World, not somehow revolutionize what already exists into a socialist space, knowing that the very fundamental problem is that we extract from the majority of the human population.
The president has declared a state of national emergency.
Now, if you want to keep going on with the ID poll thing, hey, have at it. You know, do it. The more you people do this, the more you are going to destabilize U.S. society. You are going to weaken the imperialist core. And if you do it enough, there's going to be a collapse, maybe a civil war, and the United States will lose its imperialist power. And then other countries around the world who are actually striving for freedom away from imperialism will have the room now to do so.
Now that's how it's done!
You know, like die cis scum. Then turn around and say, why won't cis scum join our revolutionary effort? Well, because you just said that they had to die.
You ain't really that stupid, nigga, are you? You ain't really that stupid, nigga, are you?
You know, they're not an opposing group the way the ruling class is, the way the capitalists are. It is in the interests of, you know, cis people to have revolution. You know, it would help them as well, and you should be winning them to that argument and arguing why there should be inequality and to end these prejudices rather than just simply saying cis people evil. And yes, I realize the response that a lot of the ID poll people, oh, you're only saying this because you're cis. Every generation thinks that they invented gender nonconformity. Trust me, this goes back pretty damn far. You're not unique in this way, in any way whatsoever. I mean, that's fine. You want to be gender questioning? Fine. Do it. I don't care.
Another video was made in relationship to Jason's issue with not just queer people, but also trans persons. A transphobia that displays, despite his claim to being a Marxist, his unscientific relationship to the human experience and a fundamental lack of empathy to other human beings.
Since making this video, Maoist Rebel News has made his position on trans people clear by repeatedly and deliberately misgendering me. For some reason, Jason is incapable of understanding what he himself said to me, let alone what I said in response.
Something that is very much akin to white identity politics. A fundamental lack of empathy for anyone who is not white.
And they show up in a number of different ways. Like when anyone, white or otherwise, suggests that a white person's viewpoint is racist. When people of color talk candidly about their experiences of racism. When people of color choose not to share stories or answer questions about their racial experience. And especially whenever people of color choose not to protect the racial feelings of white people.
You can't stand from a message that says kill white people and then turn around and say, well, white people won't follow us because they're racist. No, it's because you just said to kill them. That's why they won't follow you.
Don't cry anymore, Sandy. I'll go get your bags.
So, by all means, go ahead, scream, kill Whitey. You're really only helping third worldism by doing that, by destabilizing the imperialist core, as I said.
You want to go this way?
I most certainly don't want to go that way.
Weren't we just there? We just went that way, and I'm going back. Unbelievable.
Oh, you don't have another ship, do you?
To America.
Go ahead. Do it. Push the anti-white politics, scream, die cis scum, and then turn around and wonder why none of them will follow you into revolution. But they might follow you into a racial war.
Race war! It's a goddamn race war!
And they might even have you follow into a civil war, maybe something like that. Although I sincerely doubt a real civil war will happen in the United States. But we could be looking at race riots. We could be looking at huge civil unrest, which I think that is very likely if this kind of nonsense doesn't stop. But you know what? Do it. Destabilize the U.S., ruin the U.S. empire, because that's only going to be good for third world people.